Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Tyler and today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in September. I honestly feel like in September I really got after it. There are a lot of books that I managed to get to, managed to lean into the season, read a lot of fantasy, finish off some series while also starting some new ones. So there is a lot to cover today. I think this is going to be a long one, so grab a drink, grab a snack, and let's talk about some books. I have some notes to help me get through this because I've been sick the past few days and the combination of an energy drink and my cold medicine probably wasn't my best idea. But starting off simple with some of my reading stats, in September I managed to get to 10 books, and the breakdown of that was 4 fantasy, 3 romance, 1 sci-fi, and 2 DNFs. Regarding the TBR that I set at the beginning of September, I'm going to say that I attempted 8 out of the 8 books on my TBR, but keep in mind some of those I didn't fully complete because of the 2 DNFs. If we take those DNFs out of the picture in regards to ratings, I had a really highly rated month at a 3.9 star average. And then for my total number of pages, I read 3,570 pages in total. I also like to take this moment to plug my Fable and my Goodreads by leaving my little Fable graphic here. This gives us just a little sneak peek into what to expect with these videos and the different books that I managed to get to. But I have all my socials, including Fable and Goodreads, linked down below, so make sure to go follow me, like, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And that will bring us to the first book that I read in September, which was Sounds Like Love by Ashley Poston. This was Ashley's newest romance release, and she is an auto-buy author for me. I love how she writes sweet romances with a magical realism twist. I've had a lot of success with her, especially whenever it comes to The 7-Year Slip and a novel love story. Those are kind of my 2 favorites. So I had a lot of high hopes entering into this one, where we follow a songwriter named Joni, who's currently living in LA, but she's been really struggling with writer's block and has not been able to write a new song in quite a long time. So she decides to take the summer off and spend some time with her family in North Carolina. On top of kind of wanting a break from LA and getting some new perspective, we also learn that her mom has early onset dementia, and they kind of anticipate that this is going to be her last good summer. So Joni also wants to spend this additional time with her while they still have the chance and before things progressively get worse. But once she gets to North Carolina, she also starts hearing this man's voice in her head, as well as bits and pieces of a new song. So through the song, we come to learn that her and our MMC have this weird, very tenuous telepathic connection of needing to complete and write this song together. And we kind of see our romance build from there. But I'll be honest, I found the whole telepathic plot line to be very weak. It was really inconsistent when it would come and go. And oddly, it led to a lot of miscommunication, which I don't even know how miscommunication is possible when you're able to read each other's thoughts. But add on top of that, these two just like really don't get along. They fight a lot. I didn't really see a basis for why there would be a romance between these two. So because I couldn't really buy into the magical realism plotline, I couldn't really buy into the romance, this ended up being my least favorite Ashley Poston book. I finally settled on a 3.25 rating for this. I originally read this in a reading vlog and I think I gave it a 3.5, but if I'm being honest, the more I sit with this rating, the lower it goes, because these are just never going to be characters that I think about. This isn't a story that I really enjoyed. I think that the best parts of the story were the small town nature and the family elements. I did enjoy how the relationship with her mom and how the dementia was handled within the family. And I do think there was some growth by Joni throughout the story, but again, this just isn't one that's really gonna sit with me. I look forward to Ashley Poston's newest release. I think she's a great fall time read with those magical elements to her stories, but this one just sadly missed the mark for me. Next is a book that I enjoyed much more, and that is The Rose Bargain by Sasha Peyton Smith. I feel like I've talked about this book so many times because it has been in quite a few of my recent videos, so it is kind of funny to think that I only read this earlier in September. But if you haven't heard me talk about this book, this is kind of a new viral romantasy that's being compared to The Cruel Prince, Bridgerton, and The Selection. And the setting of the story is that it's taking place in England in the 1840s, where England is being ruled by an immortal fae queen. And within the society, it's completely normal that whenever you're coming out to society and making your societal debut, that you make a bargain with the queen. And we meet our FMC Ivy as she's preparing for her debut, and she has a lot of pressure on what her bargain is going to be. Now that is because her older sister 2 years prior brought a lot of scandal to the family with her bargain, and now their standing in society is kind of ruined. However, once Ivy gets to the palace to meet the queen announces that actually this year is going to be a little bit different, and the debutantes of society have the option option to compete for her son, Prince Bram's hand in marriage. So Ivy kind of sees this as her opportunity to help her family, and she gets involved in this competition. And once the competition gets started, this story just really takes off. We watch her competing in trials, getting to know the other girls, and possibly building a secret relationship with the other handsome prince. I ended up giving this book a 4.25 because I felt like it was just so fun and well paced. The only critique is I do feel like it read just a little bit young, even though there was some spice that happened towards the end of the book. But that being said, that's me being extremely nitpicky because I did have overall such a good time with this one. I'm really excited to see where the next book goes and see how this duology ends. And I feel like if things are handled correctly, that could potentially be a 5-star read. Now, this next book is one that I have genuinely talked about this and its series 15,000 times. If you would like a rundown or a summary on An Ember in the Ashes quartet, honestly, just watch any of like my last 8 videos. I've been talking about this non-stop, but I finally reached the finale of this series with The Sky Beyond the Storm. And this book had a lot of pressure going into it because I wasn't really loving where book 3 ended off. Honestly, the storyline was just very depressing and hopeless. So there was a lot that needed to happen within book 4, and I'm happy to say that I did enjoy this. I ended up giving this a solid 4 stars, and I think the best part of this book really was Helene's arc. She absolutely has my heart, and I feel like her character is just such an amazing depiction of perseverance paying off. The things that this young lady goes through, and yet she still has such a strong moral compass, is honestly commendable, and I think that she's genuinely the unsung hero of the series. And while 4 stars is an amazing rating, I knew for sure that none of these books in this series were a 5-star read. And I think the biggest reason for that is I think this series really should have been a 3-book series as opposed to 4. While there is a lot that happens in this series, I don't think it was enough to stretch into 4 books. I think the pacing between books 2, 3, and 4 really could have been condensed down just a little bit more. And if we had taken the series from 4 to 3, I think a lot of my gripes with the plot and pacing would have been rectified. So I'm feeling good at a solid 4 stars. I would definitely recommend this series, especially if you're more of a fantasy lover rather than romantasy, because the romance in these books is truly just a minor subplot. This is very much a political fantasy, and I would almost say an introduction to high fantasy because of how much politics actually takes place. And now it is time for my first DNF of the month, and that is You Belong With Me by Vari McFarlane. I will just headline that honestly, this DNF is largely my own fault. I had no idea and somehow missed that this is book 2 in a series. I will just say, to my own credit, nowhere on the back of this book does it point to that this is continuing on an existing story. And I would also like to gripe about, you know, generally whenever we're continuing a series, there will be some type of mention of that at the start of this book. Not the case with this one. So if you were like me and just randomly picked this up at your bookstore, you would have no idea that this is actually continuing on an existing story. So with that out of the way, I think this book largely should be categorized as a women's fiction book with a subplot of romance following our FMC Edie. Now in book 1, we're clearly introduced to Edie, her background, and how she ends up meeting a famous movie star, Elliot, and watching them initially fall in love. Now the problem with not reading book 1 and missing out on all of that is book 2 kicks off with them getting back together and trying to make their 2 very different worlds work in a relationship. I ended up getting to page 141. Honestly DNF'd it right in the middle of a chapter because, if I'm being honest, there was not one part of this book that I actually enjoyed. I really didn't like the writing style. It felt so basic and honestly almost amateur to me. I found our FMC Edie to be so painfully insecure whenever it came to her relationship with Elliot, and on top of that, I didn't find their relationship interesting either. So because there was basically nothing for me to hold on to in this story, I just realized that life is too short to be reading bad books. As you'll see throughout the rest of this video, I had a lot of good books stacked up for the rest of this month. I didn't feel like it was serving me in any way to push further. I got to almost 50% in this, and I felt like that was enough for me to determine that I don't think this author or this book is for me. Because of what I felt towards the writing style, I don't think I'm gonna go back to book 1 to try and gain greater perspective on these characters. I'm just gonna leave it at that. There are so many books to read, so many books on my TBR and authors I want to try out. I think this author is just gonna end up being a pass for me. You might recognize these next few books because now we are getting to the books that I read in my 24-hour readathon. I will make sure to leave a link to that above and below in case you're interested in watching me struggle through reading these next 4 books. But I started it off short and sweet by getting to Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. Now this is continuing on with the Caraval universe, but this is the sister series that comes after that. And I've heard so many people say that you can skip the Caraval trilogy and just hop right into Once Upon a Broken Heart. So with hearing people say that, I thought this book was going to take place years and years after Caraval ended, but that is definitely not the case. This only takes place like 6 weeks after Caraval ends. So I am very shocked that is the sentiment entering into this book. I think definitely you should read the Caraval series before hopping into this one. Mainly why I think that's so important is our male main character in this book, Jax, who is the Prince of Hearts, is introduced to, and we got a lot of backstory in the Caraval trilogy. Now he's more of a side character in that trilogy, and he is our main character within these books. We get introduced to our female main character, Evangeline, as she's making a deal with Jax. Now the love of her life is getting married to someone else, so she bargains with Jax that in exchange for 3 kisses, he will stop the wedding. And naturally, each of these kisses just cause further and further chaos because Jax has some secret plans for Evangeline. And overall, I would say that this book was fine. You know, it was fun, it was quick paced. I think it's sitting at probably about a 3.25 stars. Now what I will say, what I think this book does really well is creating a very magical atmosphere and setting the scene. However, the main drawback of this and the Caraval trilogy is they are just simply too young for me. In both series, I find the FMCs to be quite aggravating because they are just so naive and their decision making is truly questionable at best, but I think these are just better geared towards a younger audience. I think honestly young teens could pick up and read these books, but I do already own book 2 in the series, so I'm going to continue on. I've heard a lot of good things about book 2, so I'm hoping that maybe that could push towards being like a 4-star read, but we'll see what happens. I'm not getting too invested in where this plotline is going. I think these are good books to pick up in the fall, but again, I would say for a younger audience rather than us mid-20s and above. Okay, getting through this, now onto the 6th book of the month, which is She Really Going Out With Him by Sophie Cousens. In this one we follow Anna, who is a single mom of 2 who's really struggling post-divorce to find herself. And at work, her writing column is currently at risk of being taken away and given to her work rival, Will. So she has to come up with a new fresh idea for work to keep readers engaged. And so she comes up with this plan that she's going to go on 7 dates. However, the twist is that all of the dates are going to be chosen by her 2 children. And we just watched so many funny situations play out that naturally occur when a 7 and like 10-year-old are choosing your dates. Anna ends up having some wild nights, some mishaps, and just about everything in between. And kind of in these unexpected moments, she's slowly finding herself more and more throughout the process. And over time, we see the line between work rivals to maybe a little bit more with Will start to happen. And I found that this was a very wholesome, sweet romance with lots of really good banter. This was originally recommended to me as something similar to Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and I think the main reason of that is the banter. I ended up settling on a 4 stars for this one because I did really enjoy the plot and the romance, but there was some detachment because I couldn't fully relate to Anna and what she's experiencing. So I think this would really hit home for those probably over 30, and if you're a big fan of Annabelle Monaghan, because I feel like Annabelle Monaghan's books start in a really similar way with a single mom in her mid-30s finding herself post-divorce. So if any of those things speak to you, I would say that this would definitely be one to pick up. This was my 2nd book by Sophie Cousens, and I definitely look forward to reading more by her. From there, I picked up A Tempest of Tea by Hafsah Faizal. I really didn't know what to expect getting into this one because I had a lot of high hopes for this, but this was originally put on my September TBR because it was the lowest rated book I had on my physical TBR, which really took me by surprise. And I really hate that for this author because I really ended up loving this book. Within this book, our main character that we follow is Arthie, who runs a very infamous tea house named Spindrift. And it's infamous because this tea house turns into a bloodhouse by night, illegally serving the city's vampires. When Spindrift and her livelihood is threatened, she's forced to put together a crew to infiltrate the secret society known as the Ethereum and steal an important document. And what I enjoyed about the story is that we also got two other point of views. The first additional POV we get is Jen, who's kind of her partner in crime and lifelong friend. And we also get a third point of view of a crew member who's brought on. But as the back of the book points to, not everyone is actually on her side, and we know that this crew member plans on betraying Arthie. I love that we actually got the point of view of who we anticipate is going to cause the conflict in this story. I love as readers knowing just a little bit more than our characters and being able to guess and plot out ways that the plan is going to go wrong. I really don't enjoy single POV in my stories, especially when our character just naturally knows a lot less than everyone else around them. So because of naturally anticipating how wrong this heist is going to go, I thought that the heist was going to be the climax of the story, but little did I know that it's basically everything that happens after the heist where things get really interesting. So I ended up having a really good time with this one, and I felt like all of the twists and turns throughout the story kept me really engaged, and I landed on a 4.25 star rating for this one. I also love that it's not some huge fantasy book that's really intimidating to get through. This is just over 300 pages and it's only going to be a duology, so I would 100% recommend that you pick this up this fall because book 2 in this duology also just came out, so I'm really looking forward to picking that one up and seeing how the story is going to end. And ending off that readathon, I actually found my highlight of the month, which was Renegades by Marissa Meyer. Truly, to just summarize this book and my experience, it was just that this book was so fun. This is a YA sci-fi novel following Nova and Adrian, and we basically get introduced to this world through Nova's villain origin story and watching how she becomes involved with this group called the Anarchist, who are kind of viewed as the villains within the society. Now, the heroes of the story are called the Renegades, and our MMC Adrian is a renegade. However, he has a few secrets of his own that he's been hiding, and their stories become intertwined as Nova goes undercover at Renegades headquarters to try and learn how to take them down. Because of how fun this was, because of how unique I found the plot to be of superheroes versus supervillains, I ended up giving this a 4.5 star rating. Now I will say that the biggest con to expect when entering into this book is that it is just simply too long. This is 550 pages, and for a YA start to a trilogy, that is pretty damn chunky. And one small additional critique I have is that I do think Marissa Meyer maybe leaned on a little bit too much these Saved by the Bell type moments for both Nova and Adrian as they're about to reveal themselves and reveal their biggest secrets. I do think both of the characters overall lacked a little bit of self-preservation, but I will say that is me just being a little bit nitpicky. I ended up listening to the audiobook of this as I was puzzling, and I feel like just binging this in like 2 sessions was honestly the way to go with this because I was just so fully immersed in the story. I do say at the end of that readathon, I don't think this is the book to pick up if you're just a very casual reader of like, oh, I just want to read for 30 minutes a night or a few chapters here and there. I do think too much time away from the story, you won't be as immersed and fully gripped. So this is one I would definitely recommend binging as much as you can, and I would highly encourage the audiobook as well. I had originally thought that the rating for this would be a 4.25, but I have to say the last chapter of this book absolutely blew me away. Maybe it was just the 24-hour readathon brain, but I did not see that coming whatsoever. So I did have to bump up the star rating just a little bit more. But this is such a good book. Even though this is definitely YA, I would honestly encourage this to just about anyone, regardless of age. But I am very, very excited to see where this trilogy goes, and I plan on picking up books 2 and 3 later this month. Now, the next book I read was One Golden Summer by Carley Fortune, and you might be asking yourself, Tyler, why are you reading this very summery book at the end of September? And that is a very valid question. I'm finally getting to my book club's book pick, which has kind of haunted me for the past 2 months, because this is a very cute, summery romance following Alice and Charlie. We get introduced to Alice as she is really struggling and grieving the end of her long-term relationship. And we also see that Alice's grandmother is really struggling as well after her hip replacement surgery. So Alice wants to help, and she also thinks they would both benefit from a break from regular regular life and recommends that they spend the summer together in Barry's Bay, where Alice had a very formative summer with Nan whenever she was 17. And once at Barry's Bay, she gets introduced to Charlie, who very quickly inserts himself into Alice and Nan's life. And we watch a very sweet summer of honestly all three of them healing and a relationship being built between Charlie and Alice. I did enjoy my time while reading this. I really love Charlie. So I landed on a 4 stars with this one. I will say some of my biggest drawbacks with this one is I feel like the first 50 pages were honestly terrible. The writing style of the first 50 pages honestly felt completely different to the rest of the book. It wasn't until Charlie was introduced that I feel like the writing really soared, because I do feel like Alice on her own, she's kind of just like a wet blanket sometimes. This was also my first Carley Fortune book, and I do have to say that I learned that her spice really is not for me. There was so much edging that happened regarding the spice in this book because there was just constant interruptions that after like the 5th time I was honestly screaming at the book to just get to the point. So besides those main 2 critiques, overall, this was a fun read. I don't think this book would stand out without Charlie. I do think he definitely helps the rating, but I can see why this was so popular this summer. And if you didn't get to this book this summer, I would definitely recommend adding it to your list for next, because this would be such a great book to pick up by the beach or by the pool. And that leads me to the last book of September, which was Bourbon and Lies by Victoria Wilder. And this was also my second DNF of the month. Now, generally, I like to get to 50% or just about 50% before DNFing a book, genuinely forcing myself to get to 35% of the way through this book. I did headline when adding this to my TBR that this was a book that was outside of my comfort zone because it is categorized as romantic suspense, which is not a category or genre that I had read from before. And as I was reading this, I kept trying to remember that and adjusting my expectations, but it honestly just got to a point of being painful and I was hating my time while reading it. The book starts off with as we're getting introduced to our FMC Lainey as she is currently getting relocated through witness protection program to a town called Fiasco, Kentucky. And her new life starts off with her living at a bourbon distillery, which is run through the Fox family, who conveniently is a family of 3 super hot single brothers. All of that is fine and good, but tell me why 72 hours after the most traumatic event of her life, the first time she ever lays eyes on our MMC Grant, she instantly wants to bone him. Tell me why 12% into this book, after 2 conversations, he's getting off to her in the middle of his kitchen. And tell me why, sitting at a dinner table in front of 2 young children, she's talking about previously being a burlesque dancer and how she's a good tease. This really isn't coming from a place of me being a prude because I love spice in books, but I need to have some basis for spice in books. This book was so hypersexual and trying so hard to be sexy that I couldn't have found it less sexy or been more turned off because there was just no development whenever it came to plot or relationship, and every brief interaction just felt so forced and lackluster. So simply, it is just a no from me, dog. I have no interest in finishing out the series or picking up anything else by this author. So I know that was a brutal way to end off September, but overall I am very happy with how September went. I'm really happy that I managed to try to get to 10 books in the month, and I'm hoping that the same happens for October because my October TBR is so stacked. But if you have made it to the end of the video, 1, thank you for sticking around and listening to me ramble for this long. But if you want to let me know that you made it this far, either let me know a book that you read in September that you really enjoyed, or if you're feeling spicy, maybe leave me a comment about a book you recently did not enjoy. But for now, this is where I would love you and leave you, so thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye guys!